Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Virtually Seeing the World. In this episode, we'll be touring and exploring northwest Australia. We'll be taking off from Derby, heading all the way this way down towards Port Hedland. We'll be heading all the way down to Exmouth, Cape Range National Park, Coral Bay, and towards Carnarvon. See the world! Today we'll take off from Derby and we will head west towards the western coast of Australia. Derby was famous in the 1920s as the terminus of the first scheduled aviation service in Australia, with the West Australian Airways Limited at the time. Their service began with their first flight on the 5th of December 1921, which crashed near Geraldton. At one time, the Perth to Derby service was the world's longest passenger airline route. We're just approaching the town of Derby. It's got a population of slightly over 3,000, with half of the population being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander descent. Derby has the highest tides in Australia, with the difference between the low and the high tide reaching almost 12 meters, or around 40 feet. The town was founded in 1883 and named after Edward Stanley, the 15th Earl of Derby, the British Secretary of State for the colonies at the time. As we fly towards Broome, Broome was known for having a pearling industry, which involved a lot of people diving to gather pearls, and that created a lot of conflicts, including race riots in the 1920s between different Asian groups of people. Broome has also had a telegraph undersea cable laid in 1889 from Broome to East Java, connecting it to England, and so on the right you see what is now called Cable Beach because of that. And straight ahead you see out to sea, about 30 meters out when the low tide is out, you can see dinosaur footprints that are 130 million years old from the early Cretaceous era. As we fly through, straight ahead is the 80-mile beach. It is one of the most important sites for migratory shorebirds. And we are currently at 15,000 feet and we will drop down a bit lower. Here you see it a bit lower, and let's talk a bit more about the birds. It regularly supports over 400,000 shorebirds, including over 1% of the global population of bar-tailed godwits, eastern curlews, great knots, red-necked stints, great-tailed tattlers, Terex sandpipers, pied oystercatchers, greater sand plovers, oriental plovers, red-capped plovers, and oriental pratincoles. It's a very important area for birds around here. In 1863, Peter Hedland, a Swedish-born mariner, was the first European to note the harbour's existence and using it as a port. He arrived here on his boat, Mystery. Today, Port Hedland is the highest tonnage port in Australia. It has a natural deep anchorage harbour, which, as well as being the main fuel and container receival port for the region, is also seen as a perfect place for shipment of iron ore being mined in the ranges around here. Other activities also include mining of salt, manganese, also livestock and natural gas fields, and lithium. When I looked at this place on Google Maps satellite view, I was really intrigued by the green color of the golf course, so I wanted to see what it looks like in Flight Simulator, and sure enough, as you see, it is very, very green. We're flying towards Karratha, a small city in Western Australia. It was established in 1968 to accommodate the processing and exportation force of the Hammersley Iron Mining Company, and in the 80s, petroleum and liquefied natural gas operations of the Northwest Shelf venture. We're now flying towards Barrow Island. The island has a rich history of, well, first indigenous Australians about 4,000 years ago, and then obviously in the 17th century a lot of navigators had bumped into it mistakenly, believing it to be part of the mainland Australia. Whalers were also known to operate in this area from the 1800s onwards. It has a very rich environment of different species and animals and grasslands, but currently it is used mainly as a place for oil and gas. In the 1960s, commercial quantities of oil were discovered, and today it is the site for Australia's leading producer of oil. There is also a small airport and a little apartment complex for workers on the island. Just about 12 miles north of Barrow Island is an archipelago of around 174 small islands called the Montebello Islands. They're very beautiful. There's a lot of beautiful environment there, a lot of beautiful birds. But sadly, in the 1950s, this site was used by the British military to perform atmospheric nuclear weapon tests. And in 1956, one of these bombs, called the Mosaic G2, was the largest nuclear explosion in Australia, with an official yield of 60 kilotons. It was such a big explosion The fallout contaminated areas as far as 1700 miles east, or almost 3,000 kilometers east in Queensland. And we're just overflying it now. This is exactly where the explosion happened here. You won't be able to see this one in Flight Simulator, but in real life you can see it. The SS Mildura, a ship, was wrecked off this coast here in 1907. It was carrying a cargo of cows, and after the wreck the crew got ashore safely, but sadly the cows were lost. In the early 1600s, this little town was discovered. It's called Exmouth, and it is popular for diving and snorkeling. Some of the famous snorkeling spots include Turquoise Bay and Oyster Stacks. On April 20th, 2023, Exmouth will be in the direct path of a total solar eclipse, which will be the first one to be visible in Australia since November 2012. We're now flying towards Carnarvon. Just underneath us is the Gascoyne River. The Idgarda people are the traditional owners of this region around Carnarvon. Before the European settlement, the place now called Carnarvon, located at the mouth of the Gascoyne River, was known as Kuinuwardu, which means neck of water. And we will fly out to sea and turn around and land in a minute. Thank you for exploring this part of the world with me. And in the next episode we will be flying from Carnarvon all the way south to Jurien Bay, and also explore a bit more inland as well. Thank you and bye-bye.